Welcome back to Learn, Create, Sew. In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make this simple Christmas gnome. These are a lot of fun to make and really popular nowadays at Christmas. It doesn't take a lot of time, it doesn't take a lot of supplies, and they go really quick. So this is a really fun project to whip out during the holidays. Let's get started with our supplies. For this project, you'll want some fabric for the hat of the gnome. I'm using flannel. You're also going to want fabric for the body. I'm using felt, which is really quick and easy to work with. I also have some fur fabric that I'm going to use for the beard. When you choose your fur fabric, you want to make sure that it's a fur that has a really long pile. So the pile is the length of the hairs. And so you can see that the hairs on my fur here extend pretty far beyond the edge of the fabric, and that's what you want to look for. If the fur that you find is really short hairs, has a really small pile, you're not going to get the same effect. So look for a really long pile on your fur when you're picking that out. You're also going to want a Pom Pom for the top of the hat if you like, and I'm using a wooden bead for the nose. Something else that's also helpful with the gnome is poly pellets. The gnomes tend to wobble a bit, so if you want yours to stand still as a decoration, you don't want it to fall over, something to weigh it down would be helpful. I've used poly pellets, I've used rice, I've used crushed walnut shells. Poly pellets are probably the most long-lasting, but pretty much anything that's heavy and won't go bad that you can put at the bottom of your gnome to help weigh it down. And then you'll also want regular Polyfil stuffing. The first thing you're going to want to do is head to my website and print out the free pattern. This pattern is available in 2 different sizes. I'm making the medium today, so just go ahead and print your pattern out and tape the pieces together. I'm going to begin by cutting out the hat piece. You only need to cut out 1 hat piece, so I'm going to go ahead and fold my fabric back so I'm working with just 1 layer here. And I'm going to trace my pattern onto the wrong side. For the gnome, since the hat really doesn't take that much fabric, one thing that you might want to do is what's called fussy cutting. So you can lay your pattern piece on your fabric and make sure you really like the position and the direction of your pattern on your fabric for your hat. On mine, the print's multi-directional, it really doesn't matter where it goes. So I'm just going to cut mine to minimize the amount of fabric I have to use. I now have my hat piece, and I'm going to repeat this process for the body and the bottom of the gnome. The next thing we're going to do is prepare the fur. When you're getting your fur ready, what you want to make sure of is the direction the hairs are going. So imagine if you were brushing the hairs down. When you look at your beard pattern piece, you want the direction of the hair to be following the arrows. So you can see that the hair on my fur piece here is going down this way, and so is the arrow. It usually becomes really obvious if it's going the wrong way. You could see it bunches all up and doesn't look good at all. So I'm going to flip it over so that I'm looking at the back of the fur piece. And then I'm going to take my pattern piece and trace it onto the back. And now I'm ready to cut it out. When you cut out the fur, you have to be a little careful. You don't want to cut like you normally do. Normally you grab your scissors and you just go to town, you start cutting, and that's great. But with this fabric, if you just cut on the line like normal and go slicing around, what's going to happen is you're going to cut off all of these long hairs, and it's going to look like your gnome just had an unfortunate haircut. So you want to make sure that when you cut out the fur, you only cut the backing. So you can see that all of these little fur fibers are attached to a piece of fabric on the back. Our goal is to only cut the fabric on the back. So when I cut out fur, I like to use my little tiny scissors, and I don't open them all the way. When I cut out the fur, I cut in itty bitty little snips, just a little bit at a time, but since I'm not opening up the scissors all the way, it doesn't give an opportunity for all those hairs to get caught in there. So I'm going to very slowly just snip around the edge to cut the fur. You can see as you do this, when you pull away the backing, the fibers of the hair will separate and you still get that long length that you wanted. Let's add the beard to the gnome. Take the pattern piece for the body and trim the pattern piece at the dotted line in the center. This line represents the beard placement line. Place the top of the pattern piece on top of the body piece. So the body piece is the red felt here, and so I'm going to align this pattern on the top. And then I'm going to center the beard. If you need to, the pattern piece on the beard has a center line, and you can mark that center line on here if you need to. I'm just going to eye it, but I'm going to line up the top edge of the beard piece with that pattern edge. And I'm going to make sure it's centered. Now I'm going to pin it in place, and I'm going to head to my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew along the top edge of the beard with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now take the body piece and fold it in half with right sides together, so you should no longer see the beard. Pin the sides together. And we're going to sew along the side edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're going to sew from the tip all the way down to the corner with 1/4 inch seam. However, we want to leave an opening to turn. You want the opening to be above the beard line, but not all the way to the top. Slip stitching the very tip point is difficult, so I'd leave about a 2.5 to 3 inch opening in this section here to help you turn it later. Now that the sides are sewn together everywhere except your little opening at the top, now we're going to go ahead and put the base on the bottom. Make sure that the beard is tucked down inside. You don't want it to get in your way. And then place your base piece right side down and align the edges and pin. When I sew this in place, I'm going to use 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I like to sew with the circle flat on the bottom, so I'm looking at the top edge here. That way I can move the gnome fabric out of the way as needed when I attach it. And I'm going to use 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that the base is attached, I'm going to clip the curves and corners. I'm going to use pinking shears to do this along the edge of the base, but you can definitely use regular scissors if you don't have pinking shears. Just cut little triangles around the edges to help it lay nice and flat. Be careful, you don't want to get too close to your stitches because you don't want to end up with a hole. I'm also going to clip a little bit off the point here. And now I'll turn the gnome right side out through the opening. It's now time to stuff the gnome. I'm going to start with the poly pellets. If you'd like to, you can simply place some poly pellets in now so that they rest at the bottom of your gnome. I'm going to do something a little bit different just to ensure that those poly pellets stay at the bottom. I'm going to make myself a little poly pellet pouch with scrap fabric, and I'll show you how I do that. I'm just going to use some scrap fabric here to cut 2 circles. I like the circles to be a bit bigger than my base piece. You don't have to be super exact because we're not really going to see this. Now I'm going to sew around the fabric with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving a little opening for my poly pellets. So if you'd like to, you can go ahead and put the poly pellets directly in the gnome. I like to use a funnel. A larger size funnel works great. I've tried using these little ones, and the pellets tend to get caught in this little opening. So you can just scoop in as many poly pellets as you like and place them inside your gnome. Or if you're paranoid about them moving around like I am, you can put the poly pellets inside the little pouch. So I'm not even going to bother turning this right side out. No one's going to see it. So I'm just going to fill this up. So I've used about 8 tablespoons in mine, and I'm going to go ahead and head to the sewing machine and sew this closed. And as I do, I'm going to be really careful to make sure that the poly pellets are out of my way so I don't hit any. So I'm going to put a pin about 1/2 inch away from my sew line to hold those pellets down. Now I'm going to place the poly pellets inside the gnome. Now that my poly pellets are in there, I'm going to try to arrange it nice and flat on the bottom. To make it easier to get that pellet pouch in there, you can leave a little larger opening, or you can cut a smaller pouch for the pellets, such as one that's the same size as the base. Okay, looks like my poly pellets are in there good. They're filling out the edges at the base of my gnome. And now I'm going to finish stuffing the rest with polyfill. Be sure to fluff your polyfill first. Tear it into tiny pieces so that it's not clumpy. And then go ahead and fill up the gnome. I like to take the time to really shape it as I place the polyfill in, especially around those poly pellets. Now that the base is pretty full, I'm going to start slip stitching this closed. If you don't know how to slip stitch, there's a link to my tutorial for slip stitching below in the description. But you're going to want to slip stitch a 1/4 inch away from the edge of the fabric. Don't go all the way up, but go about halfway and then stop and add some more polyfill as needed. My gnome is all stuffed and the back is now closed. Now let's begin on the hat. Take your hat piece and lay it right side down. We're going to hem the curved edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we're simply going to fold it up a 1/4 inch and stitch. We're going to stitch with a seam allowance that is just a little bit smaller than that 1/4 inch, and that will hold our hem in place. And we're going to do so all the way along the curved edge. you can see that the bottom edge of the hat is now finished. If you'd like to, you can go ahead and press that. And then take the hat and fold it right sides together. And stitch along the sides with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Go ahead and turn the hat right side out. And what I like to do next is go ahead and check the fit. Place the hat on top of the gnome and make sure you like it. I like the hat on mine to be just a little bit slouchy, so it's a little bit loose, so that when I put that nose on, I get some crinkles and wrinkles on the hat. You don't have to do that. If you find that it's too loose for you, you can go ahead and use a larger seam allowance if you like. Mine looks good. So next I'm going to go ahead and add the nose. When you add the nose to the gnome, make sure it's centered. So if you find the back seam and go directly opposite, that should be your center. It's also the center of the beard. And where you place the nose is really up to you. It's just where you like it. Some people like it down lower, some people like it up higher. I tend to like it when the nose is placed about a 1/4 inch from the top of the beard. So that gives some slouch over the nose. So that's where I'm going to place mine. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the hat, find the center of the beard, and I'm going to place it so that the top of the nose is about a 1/4 inch down, and this is just a wooden bead. If you're making a lot of these and you know exactly where you like the nose to be placed, you can also add the nose at the beginning right after you stitch on the beard, and that sometimes is a little bit easier sewing it on when it's nice and flat. So I'm going to start up here so that my knot is hidden in the felt there. I'm going to go ahead and stitch on the bead. Sometimes when you're sewing with the wood beads, they can be a little rough inside, so be careful of that and make sure your thread's going all the way through and it's not caught in the middle there. And last, I'm going to add the pom pom to the top of the hat. I'm starting with the needle inside the hat. And when you sew on the pom pom, take care to make sure you're actually sewing through the pom pom itself and not just fluff, because you want to make sure it doesn't fall off. You could also definitely just hot glue this on if you prefer. I like to go through this several times to make sure it's nice and strong. Now go ahead and make sure the seam is on the back and place your hat on your gnome. I like to slouch mine down, so I'll pull it so that it goes past the nose and then scrunch it up and over. And if you want to, you can definitely hand sew the hat in place or hot glue the hat in place to make sure it doesn't move around and it stays exactly where you like it. I like to play with the little folds here at the nose until I have it laid just the way I want it. One of the reasons I love the gnome so much is because you can be super creative. You can add any embellishments or decorations that you like to your gnome to make it all personalized for you. And if you keep an eye out on my future videos, I'll show you some ways to spruce up your little gnomes, make them a little fancier. I hope you've enjoyed this project. Happy sewing and happy holidays.